喺2015年2月22日嘅2012榮耀盼望主日信息入邊，日華牧師分享到，早喺幾百年前 Freemason 已經知道基督徒被提嘅大約時間，甚至可能已經知道準確嘅年份。佢哋為到將會出現嘅被提事件準備咗一個虛假嘅答案，提供俾全世界唔能夠被提嘅人，令佢哋不單接受敵基督嘅統治同埋666受印晶片，更一同視將會第二次降臨嘅主耶穌同埋主耶穌帶嚟嘅天使同埋聖徒係入侵地球嘅邪惡外星人。因為敵基督早於幾十年前已經為全人類鋪排咗一個大迷惑嘅故事，令全人類相信宇宙存在住所謂嘅外星人，而且有部分外星人係邪惡嘅，企圖入侵並併吞地球。早於1980年代，列根就任美國總統嘅時候，曾多次喺唔同場合，包括聯合國大會嘅演說入邊提到，點樣令全人類合一、和平共處。就係當有外星人入侵地球嘅時候，人類就會自然合一，對抗外敵啦。
I couldn't help at one point in my discussions privately with General Secretary Gorbachev, when you stop to think that we're all God's children wherever we may live in the world, I couldn't help but say to him, just think how easy his task and mine might be in these meetings that we held if suddenly there was a threat to this world from some other species, from another planet, outside in the universe. We'd forget all the little local differences that we have between our countries, and we would find out once and for all that we really are all human beings here on this earth together. Well, I don't suppose we can wait for some alien race to come down and threaten us, but I think that between us we can bring about that realization. In our obsession with antagonisms of the moment, we often forget how much unites all the members of humanity. Perhaps we need some outside universal threat to make us recognize this common bond. I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world. And yet I ask you, is not an alien force already among us? What could be more alien to the universal aspirations of our peoples than war and the threat of war? I think maybe I'd answer it this way. I keep, in my frustration sometimes, actually, if you count some of the things going on in smaller countries and all, there have been about 114 wars since World War II. But I've often wondered, what if all of us in the world discovered that we were threatened by a power from outer space, from another planet? Wouldn't we all of a sudden find that we didn't have any differences between us at all? We were all human beings, citizens of the world, and wouldn't we come together to fight that particular threat?
其實早於20年前，喺日華牧師分享加拉太書嘅主日信息入邊，已經有3篇跟進行列，不明飛行物體 UFO 第1至第3篇，內容分享到，敵基督為基督徒被提，早已編造咗最佳嘅騙詞同埋藉口，將會係外星人入侵並拐帶所有基督徒，並且外星人將會聯群結隊再次入侵地球，所以成為基督徒會非常危險。喺2014年初，美國太空總署唔知係有心抑或無意，喺佢嘅網站上邊發表咗一段有關太空穿梭機奮進號執行任務 STS-088 嘅一啲相片，可以非常清楚睇到一艘不明飛行物體，佢嘅形狀唔太規則，顏色真係純黑灰色，外形就好似電影《天煞地球反擊戰》入邊反派邪惡入侵者嘅外星人戰鬥飛船，又好似電影《蝙蝠俠》入邊嘅蝙蝠車一樣，有住非常富時代感同埋型格嘅外表。呢啲相片一經網上發布，即時引嚟全世界嘅注意，亦令到相信外星人同埋 UFO 存在嘅群體言之鑿鑿咁樣聲稱呢一個物體能夠證明外星人存在，並且喺過去嘅13000年，外星人一直以呢個名為黑色騎士嘅神秘衛星環繞地球，監視人類嘅一舉一動。
但係其實呢一艘神秘黑色騎士衛星係咩嚟嘅呢？係點樣被人類發現？又點解會被取名為黑色騎士？如同對虛構漫畫中嘅英雄人物蝙蝠俠嘅別號一樣呢？ 原來著名天才科學家尼古拉特斯拉 Nikola Tesla 曾經喺1899年以佢喺美國科羅拉多傳事嘅設備接收到一個來自外太空嘅信號。佢認為該信號係由有智慧嘅生命故意向地球發送嘅，目的係想同人類進行通訊，因為嗰個信號係有規律而且重複咁向地球發放。起初 Tesla 以為信號係嚟自火星，但係後嚟卻認為係嚟自其他外太空地區。到咗1920年代，好些業餘無線電愛好者都發現咗呢一個來自外太空可能帶住信息嘅密碼信號。直到1974年1月，蘇格蘭科學家 Duncan Lunan 對當時接收到嘅信號進行解碼，並將信號繪製成圖表。佢認為信號嘅內容係指該衛星喺13000年前由天上星座牧夫座嘅主星耿河1嘅系統地區嚟到地球。
在地球外围的外气层的上面的轨道呢，这个轨道上面照理说呢，在人类进入外太空探测之前，轨道上应该是干净无缺，没有任何的一些飞行器在上面。可是呢，在1960年代，美国跟苏联这个时候开始进入了太空争霸战了。但是呢，在这个时候呢，却发现到地球的外围轨道上好像呢出现了一颗卫星，这颗卫星呢命名为一个黑骑士卫星，而这颗卫星究竟是什么东西呢？人类还没有进入外太空，卫星已经在地球附近绕行了，这代表了什么样的含义呢？
是的，立刚，我们现在看到照片上面显示出来，漂浮在空中，这是在极地轨道天空上面拍摄到的。这是太空梭拍摄到的吗？就是谜一样的黑骑士卫星。这是奋进号太空梭它拍到的一个照片。而在这个照片出现之前呢，它被赋予了很多神奇的想象跟解释，大家都去猜它到底是什么。我们没有看过它是什么形象，但是它已经出现很久了。我们去看看它到底是什么，因为它的形状是非常不规则的，它的有点像是延伸出来的翅膀，可是又跟我们传统概念里面这个卫星的那个太阳能电板完全不一样。对，你说它是火箭残骸吗？那怎么会在轨道上运行这么久？
正常火箭残骸应该会要进入大气层燃烧而且殆尽。
那你说它的形状这么不规则，难道是幽浮吗？于是所有人就去猜想它到底是什么。有一种说法是，它是2009年美苏2颗卫星相撞的残骸，可是这个说法被破解了。大家说它是不合理的，因为奋进号太空梭是在1998年就拍到这2张照片。所以说它到底是什么？让我们来看一下。早在1954年，《圣路易邮报》、旧金山观察家报这2家报纸就引述过消息来源说，地球轨道上方有一个不知名的东西在绕行，讲的就是我们刚刚看到的黑骑士卫星。到了1960年呢，他们又说这个东西就是刚才立刚一开始讲到的美苏太空竞赛，发上去谁打上去的一个神奇的物体。可是呢，它3个星期以后又神奇的消失了。所以说，美国那时候他们报道就说这是苏联的监测卫星，只是它非常的奇妙，我们目前还掌握不到它。你看看太空竞赛到什么程度，大家都非常的紧张。因此说，它就引起了很广泛的讨论，大家往回去找它到底是什么东西，因为没有人搞得清楚、说得明白它究竟是怎么样的一个角色。1970年，苏格兰的天文学家邓肯鲁南他就说，这个不明物体它发射出来的无线电波，经过他长时间的追踪解读，他发现他对照了整个星座图，它是来自于遥远的牧夫座。
你的意思是说，那个物体会发射无线电波，而那电波的型号跟牧夫座传过来的讯息是一样的？
是的，也就是呢，这个邓肯鲁南他就说，这个物体呢，它停留在我们的地球轨道上已经超过13000年。
天哪，这么久了！
立刚，13000年，难道它是外星人派来监视我们地球的吗？还是说，地球在13000年前的早期文明已經可以發射這種特殊的人造衛星在天空上跟外星人對話呢？大家一團迷霧。
到咗1954年12月25日嘅聖誕節，數學家 Lancelot Tobin 公開要求科學群體喺人類登上太空前，要先向火星或者外太空發送信號，以防人類誤闖太空而帶嚟災難。但係呢個信號有冇收到回覆，卻係一個唔公開嘅秘密。 1954年3月4日，美國洛杉磯時報有報導指出，一啲科學家，包括發現冥王星嘅天文學家 Clyde Tombaugh， 佢哋有理由相信有不明物體環繞地球運行。2個月後，1954年5月14日，美國聖路易斯郵報同埋舊金山觀察者郵報報導，美國前海軍少校 Major Donald Keyhoe 指出，喺美國 White Sand 地區嘅科學家已經證實有1至2個不明物體以相反地球自轉嘅方向環繞地球運行。嗰個時候係比前蘇聯發射人類歷史上第一枚人造衛星上太空仲要早3年，所以呢個物體唔可能係現今人類所做嘅。喺1960年1月，美國太空圍欄衛星監視系統公佈發現另一個環繞地球兩極運行嘅不明飛行物體，但係隨後被美國國防部同埋美國總統艾森豪威爾列為國家最高機密。由於當時英美蘇三國正在進行太空發展競賽，而當時英國所發射嘅火箭名為黑色騎士 Black Knight， 所以一直沿用呢個名字嚟稱呼呢一個不明衛星。
On December 25th, 1952, famous mathematician Lancelot Hogben called upon the scientific community to send radio signals deep into the solar system. Hogben said he had no desire to visit Mars, but it might be a good idea to have a few chats with the Martians before sending rockets across space for a possible unfriendly reception. Hogben planned to send a simple code through a series of radio messages in the hope that extraterrestrials would receive and decode them, and then send some kind of response. Did extraterrestrials receive these signals? And did we get a response which has resulted in one of the biggest cover-ups in human history? March 4th, 1954. Over 3 years before the launch of the first man-made satellite Sputnik 1, the Los Angeles Times released an article suggesting that scientists had reason to believe that some small objects may be orbiting the Earth. Clyde Tombaugh, the discoverer of the planet Pluto, and Dr. Lincoln La Paz, an astronomer from the University of New Mexico and a pioneer in the study of meteors, were assigned to search for the orbiting bodies. 2 months later, Major Donald Keyhoe, the head of the biggest UFO research organization at the time called the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena, announced in an interview that 1 or 2 artificial satellites in an unfamiliar retrograde orbit had been detected by Air Force radar at White Sands. The St. Louis Post-Dispatch and the San Francisco Examiner released stories about the detection. The reports contained a notice from Canadian government scientists asking any skywatchers to be especially alert and called for them to report any unidentified aerial objects that they had seen over the previous 2 weeks. Aviation Week broke the same story in August 1954. They confirmed Keyhoe's claim that there were 2 large objects orbiting the Earth, one at 400 miles and one at 600 miles above the Earth. They claimed that the objects were natural space rocks or asteroids, but scientists soon rejected the notion that Earth could capture natural objects that would take a retrograde orbit around the planet. In January 1960, the Dark Fence satellite surveillance system detected another anomalous object which this time was in polar orbit. The commanding officer of Dark Fence raced to the Pentagon and reported the menacing stranger to the Chief of Naval Operations, and within minutes the news was communicated to President Eisenhower and marked as top secret. 3 weeks after its discovery, it was made public and featured on the front page of many newspapers. The article stated that 2 months before this, Discoverer 8 had been fired into space and was still in orbit. But Navy trackers who keep a watch on all space objects said they knew the exact whereabouts of the Discoverer rocket casings, and that this object was definitely not one of them. At first it was thought that the object had been put there by the Russians. There was also some speculation that it was a stray British rocket from the Black Knight project. At the time, putting an object into a polar orbit and keeping it there was a feat that neither the British nor the Russians had been able to accomplish. But the object was soon dubbed the Black Knight, after the aforementioned British rocket. It took 1 whole month until Time magazine released an article offering the official explanation. And even though the Navy had previously stated that they knew the exact whereabouts of the Discoverer satellites and that the only one still orbiting was Discoverer 8, it contradictorily stated the evidence from both Air Force and Navy pointed to Discoverer 5, which was fired from Vandenberg Air Force Base in California in August 1959. In March 1960, a mysterious satellite was investigated by the CIA. The object was observed on March 6th by the crew of a Swedish Airlines plane. The captain's report stated that judging from all the circumstances, it was an unidentified satellite. It was very bright and moving in a northwesterly direction just after 8 p.m. He said without a doubt it was some form of satellite. The same object was also observed from the Stockholm Observatory. An employee said that it seemed to be a satellite and that he was certain it wasn't a meteor. Both sightings were reported in the Swedish newspaper Today's News. The CIA report also talks of a so-called phantom satellite known as 1960 Alpha, which was also observed over Stockholm in Sweden on the same day. It was said to make a 90-degree turn before disappearing below the horizon. Another skywatcher was waiting to observe the phantom satellite at exactly the same time when he saw two objects which looked and moved like satellites make a 180-degree turn. In September 1960, reports of strange retrograde satellites were increasing and were causing quite a stir in the physics and astronomy community. Amateur astronomers from coast to coast and from Michigan to Missouri had reported seeing the objects. One object was said to appear at around the same time as the Echo 1 satellite, which was launched on August 12, 1960. Grumman Aircraft Corporation decided to set up a tracking station to capture a photograph of this mystery object. And on August 25, 1960, they were successful. This is the actual photograph taken by Grumman, and it's still the only confirmed photo of one of the mystery satellites available to the public. Grumman also confirmed that the object appeared around the same time as the Echo 1 satellite. They said that the color of the object varied from carrot to straw, and that the object was in a retrograde orbit traveling in an easterly to westerly direction. A few days before, on August 17th, this picture was taken in Bloomfield, Connecticut. It shows the Echo 1 satellite with an unknown object passing it on a strange orbit. In 1966, J. Allen Hynek from the Air Force's Project Blue Book wrote a long letter to Science magazine in which admitted the existence of unexplained UFO photos and radar tracking, and called for an end to the ridicule of reliable witnesses. He said Air Force reports included unexplained UFO photos, radar tracking, and unexplained pictures from Project Moonwatch and satellite tracking cameras. He also wrote about the existence of a photograph of a retrograde satellite taken 2 years before the Grumman photo. He said that the unidentified object's speed, as calculated at Chicago's Adler Planetarium, was 3 times that of any Earth-launched satellite. Unfortunately, Project Blue Book was shut down just 4 years after this, leaving the Air Force's study on the object incomplete. But one case of a retrograde satellite does remain in the Blue Book archives. The report states that an object was spotted in June 1963. The object was in orbit and traveling 1.5 times the speed of a regular satellite. So indeed, multiple satellites were found orbiting the Earth, and the question arose as to whether they were artificial or natural.
其實喺2012榮耀盼望主日信息之瑪雅年歷中，日華牧師已經分享到，創世紀之前嘅時代，曾經有其他有神創造、擁有高度智慧嘅生命喺地球上面生存過，但係後嚟因為犯罪離開神而被毀滅。佢哋曾經喺13000年前建造埃及金字塔同埋現今一啲神秘海底城市，所以呢啲同樣係嚟自13000年前出現嘅史前衛星，極可能就係由創世紀以前嘅文明所創造，而唔係外星生物設計。Freemason 早已經知道被提嘅大約時間，甚至極可能知道被提嘅準確年份，並且敵基督早已為全人類鋪排咗一場大迷惑，讓全人類相信宇宙裡面存在住一群想入侵地球嘅邪惡外星人。究竟美國太空總署喺2014年刻意公開有關神秘黑色騎士衛星嘅相片，係唔係意味住敵基督已經預備好要全世界相信世上存在所謂外星人嘅故事，嚟解釋將會喺極短時間之內發生嘅基督徒被提事件呢？